can I say what a pleasure and privilege it is not just to be here today addressing you, colleagues, but also to be sharing a platform with Louise, NEU, with Cecile, UCU, and indeed other colleagues. But education unions standing together, how important that is. I could spend the next 7 minutes talking about that, but I won't, because you've asked me to speak about something else again, which is another area where we need to be standing united, and that is the fight against, well, frankly, this racist government. I mean, let's call it for what it is. 3 years ago, colleagues, 3 years ago, almost to the day, we saw being played out on our TV screens the shocking, the racist murder of George Floyd. And we saw also the international response against racial injustice with the Black Lives Matter movement. Here at home, of course, 3 years ago, we were seeing played out on our screens the issue, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we saw black workers dying disproportionately at work because they were being left unprotected at the height of the pandemic. But we also saw, colleagues, that when black workers needed us most, quite often black workers were too concerned to come to our unions because either they didn't believe that they would be supported to challenge employers who were not keeping them safe at work. And we knew at that time that we as a movement needed to do better. We needed to demonstrate to black workers that we were absolutely there on their side. And that's what the work of the Anti-Racism Task Force has all been about. And last autumn, colleagues, at TUC Congress, we published our manifesto and our action plan. And if you've not had them, colleagues, and I don't know if copies of them are here today, but they are available for download from the TUC's website. Please do look at the action plan and manifesto. It's a commitment, colleagues, for our movement for the next 5 years to a programme of anti-racist campaigning, to tackle racism in the world of work, to tackle racism at the heart of government, and to address racism within our own trade union structures as well. That manifesto, that action plan are intended to be more than just words, colleagues, because we've had enough words when it comes to the issues of racial injustice in our labour market. Instead, what we're asking every union to do is to discuss that action plan, discuss that manifesto, and build your own action plans to tackle racism within your workplaces and within your own unions. We're asking all unions to put front and centre your collective bargaining and your organising campaigning, because we need to win for racial justice in the workplace. Because our action on racial justice is all about securing a better deal for our members in the workplace. It's all about securing more reps across our movement and more black reps across our movement. It's all about developing and building our network of trade union tutors, including black trade union tutors leading our organising effort. It's all about creating a safe and inclusive environment within our unions and ensuring that there are safe reporting mechanisms if our members and our black members have concerns about their experiences either within our movement or within their workplaces. And it's also about building our fight against the far right. And that's a really important aspect of that too. Our anti-racism network is all about tackling the fight against the far right, the injustices in the workplace, casualisation, outsourcing, but also holding the government to account. And don't we need to hold the government to account, colleagues, when we see the shocking spectacle An absolutely appalling spectacle of Boris Johnson doing his morning jog, telling the chair of the COVID-19 inquiry that all of his communications on WhatsApp, all of his diary entries are either with the Cabinet Office or somehow he can't open his phone to find them. I mean, absolutely shocking when so many people died on his watch with a government that failed ordinary working people at a time when they needed them most. Colleagues, for our movement, we know that tackling racism is front and centre of our campaigning, and we have put racial justice back on the agenda of our movement through the work of the Anti-Racism Task Force. But I have to say this, colleagues, that the government is also putting race on the agenda, but they have a different agenda. They're putting race up front and centre of their campaigning ahead of the next general election. They're hoping to spread the politics of hate and division in order to win support from working class communities who've lost out on pay, on jobs, on housing, on education, on healthcare, and so much more besides. The Tories believe that the best way for them to win at the next general election is by scapegoating and attacking refugees and blaming the poorest and the most vulnerable for the way in which they have frankly screwed up our economy and have denuded our public services of the resources that they need to support our communities at the height of this cost of living crisis. And we're seeing the age-old Tory tactic of divide and rule being played out once again by a government, I would say, of serial lawbreakers. That forced Rwanda deportation policy, the illegal migration bill, the minimum service levels bill, the police courts and sentencing bill, extending the powers of the police to stop public protest. All of that, colleagues, all of that is about ensuring that they can remove opposition, they can intimidate, and they can silence our communities. Now, we know, colleagues, that it's our communities who've borne the brunt of the policies of this government, the policies of defunding our education system and our NHS, the policies of labour market deregulation, the rise of 0 hours contracts, outsourcing and the use of fire and rehire, and of course, their greatest achievement, the worst cost of living crisis in half a century, hitting the poorest hardest. You know, whilst the rich are definitely getting richer, our members, teachers, healthcare staff, transport workers and many others are now relying on food banks. And now, of course, we have that minimum service levels bill, which is making its way through Parliament, which will mean that ordinary working people will be forced into work or be sacked if they take strike action. And just like that Policing Act, this is all about removing opposition, silencing us, stopping protest, and against state-sanctioned abuses, racism and misogyny. And we have to call it out, colleagues, for what it is. That legislation is an attack on our democracy, it's an attack on working people, it's a violation of international law, it's an attack on women, and of course it's an attack on black communities by this government, because we know that it's black workers who are going to suffer the most as a result of that law, just as they suffered at the height of the COVID pandemic. And isn't it time, colleagues, if we want to talk about minimum services, isn't it time that instead of attacking working people, we had a government that invested in the minimum service levels that we demand for our schools, our NHS and other parts of our public services, such as a qualified teacher for every class, such as children who need access to adolescent mental health support, getting that support and not having to wait weeks, months or even years to get it. for our schools and colleges to be fully funded, for decent sick pay rights, for a £15 minimum wage entitlement and an end to 0 hours contracts, for real terms pay rises for our members. Those are the minimum service levels that we demand, and those are the minimum service levels that we expect a government to be providing. You know, colleagues, this is a government that's promoting and provoking culture wars in order to attack working people, to divide working people, to attack our unions and to attack our fundamental rights. Our right to be here, our right to decent public services, our right to have a democratic voice and our right to strike. But the only thing, colleagues, and this is what gives me, it gives us all hope. The only thing that stands in their way is our movement. And that's why, when it comes to the fight against racism, we must stand together, because the only solution is by our movement stepping up and taking forward the fight against racial injustice within our society and demanding a government that's prepared and committed to do the same. And after 13 years, we have to demand better, because now is the time for that change of government. So the Anti-Racism Task Force's work has all been about securing a better deal for workers and for our communities. And our anti-racism actions, they mean nothing, colleagues. They will mean nothing if they're not about pushing back on this hostile government and the hostile environment that they have created. Pushing back, calling out this government's record as they pursue their ambitions ahead of the next general election. So the fight is in our workplaces, colleagues. Absolutely it is. The demand is that our unions step up to the plate, but also it's essential that we do everything within our collective power in the weeks and months ahead to ensure that we secure a government that is also on the side of working people, a government that's committed to racial justice. Thanks very much.